Thank you for being with me for this challenging but really necessary conversation. I'm joined by three eminent forensic pathologists who um, really rose to the occasion and responded to a call to be in Israel and to help engage in one of the most difficult but really most critical tasks of going through the remains of those who were so brutally massacred on October 7th. If we can just go around and if you can just introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about how you got involved with this and why you decided to get further involved with this. Um, uh, if you don't mind, you can call me Danny. Ariel, if you want to start, please.
Sure. So I'm a medical examiner from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I've been at this for about 16 years. And I'm a dual citizen with the United States and Israel, and had visited the office in Israel in the past. And obviously, with this event occurring, and felt like I could potentially contribute. So I volunteered when there was we all of us received an email from the National Association of Medical Examiners, and volunteered, and luckily was selected. So and was able to contribute.
Wonderful. Thank you. Uh, uh, Dr. Melinek, Judy, if you can continue, please.
Sure. My name is Dr. Judy Melinek. I'm a forensic pathologist. I was working in Wellington, New Zealand at the time of the October 7th attacks on Israel. And I am also a dual citizen. I was born in Israel, grew up in the United States, so I'm fluent in Hebrew. And I have previously had interactions and a professional relationship with the forensic services in Israel through the Forensic Institute in Abu Kabir. Um, I had come there in the past, had visited, had lectured. I also had taught students there with regards to, just online uh, relationships. Plus, I had one of their fellows shadow me at the San Francisco Medical Examiner's Office many years ago. And also, I was one of their testers because when they train forensic pathologists in Israel, they need to have international, internationally qualified experts do the oral exams so that they can meet international standards. So I was one of their on their list of people who test their trainees. So that's where my relationship with the office had been in the past, and so I immediately had seen through social media and also through the National Association of Medical Examiners the call for forensic pathologists. And I figured, given my prior relationship with the organization, with the institute, and also the fact that I was fluent in Hebrew, I might be of use. I do have some mass fatality response experience. I was in New York during 9/11.
Mm.
So that was in my background. And I'd also done some mass fatality responses in other places as well, including Oakland, California, where we had a large fire during my employment there that killed multiple people, and also in Wellington, New Zealand, where there was a fire where multiple people had been killed, and I had to be one of the, as we call them, the last responders. So, combined with my fluency in Hebrew, my prior relationship, I called up Chen Kugel, who's the head of the institute, and told him I was available to volunteer as well, and it was all organized through the agency that brought all of us over there. So I believe we're the first forensic pathologist to ever be brought to Israel in response to an incident such as this.
And assuming they made this outreach because there was just the task was so overwhelming, even for the in-country folks who were doing this.
That is correct. I mean, that's what happens in any mass fatality response anywhere in the world, is that there's an outreach to people to come and help support the local folks. I mean, we were there really as support. They were running things. They were in charge, but we were there to support them and bring our expertise and experience, but also function to some degree as international monitors to make sure that what was happening and to document for the world what was happening, to say what we saw, to be able to testify if need be, with regards to any inquiries, legal inquiries that might happen at a later time. That's part of the role of a forensic pathologist, is to also be able to testify.
Wonderful. We'll get to that in a moment. Thank you. And finally, Dr.
Sure.
Carl Wigren, who was kind of my original connection here, who reached out just about, I think, something else originally, and then this kind of incredible experience revealed itself. How did you get involved, Carl, with this?
Yeah, kind of the the same email that went out to our professional listserv, and my wife is Jewish. I didn't know much about her background and her upbringing, but we both decided it would be a very good experience for me. And so I'm a forensic pathologist located in Seattle, Washington, doing private pathology and medical legal consulting. But the essentially, I was in the plane heading to Tel Aviv and learning all about Israel seat of the pants for, about 10 hours from JFK. And I had no real idea where Gaza was or where Lebanon was or Jordan was or Syria. So it was a quick education. And then we got there on Monday at 3 a.m. and we started work, I think, at around 8:30 a.m. that same morning. So we got about 2 or 3 hours of sleep and then started doing examinations. I felt like to provide relief essentially for the 3 or 4 forensic pathologists that staff that Institute of Abu Kabir. And the agency that brought us there was the American Healthcare Professionals and Friends of Medicine in Israel, which I think is an extremely important organization now in kind of fostering ties between American healthcare professionals and healthcare professionals in Israel.
Thank you so much. So kind of to Dr. Melinek, what you were talking about before, I know that to be a medical examiner, a forensic pathologist in general is not only exploratory in kind of the physical sense, but you're also there to help to make legal cases or what have you, and to provide testimony. One of the things that so many of us are already so deeply concerned about is the fact that we're seeing a kind of Holocaust denial happening in real time. Just people's kind of oversimplified notion of who they think is a victim and who they think is a victimizer, really withstands a great deal of cognitive dissonance, so much so that people are denying that the terrible things that happened, even the eyewitness accounts, are fabricated. And to have the three of you who responded again so incredibly and selflessly to this call at such a critical time, for you to have seen and experienced the aftermath of this is really important. Your testimony is going to be critical, and so again, without getting into any inappropriate detail or anything that would transcend what your professional discretion would demand, if you can just give us a sense of the extent and the scope of the kinds of things that you witness. We hear so much in the news about Zaka kind of being on the ground, kind of dealing with, particularly from a Jewish halachic perspective, trying to gather remains so that there's some degree of burial with integrity. But you really were looking at this from a scientific perspective. This isn't just merely, although isn't merely just an eyewitness account of having seen the terrible things that happened, for example, at the Nova Music Festival, but you were there to scientifically and methodically and with great empiricism kind of witness and analyze the aftermath of what happened. If you all can just, again, share within the bounds of what you think is appropriate and okay to share for those of us who really need, well, we don't need it, but others may need an affirmation of the things that happened.
So I do want to emphasize from to be responsive to your perspective, that we were there not for the immediate response, because took about a week to get us out there. So the most immediate response was by the Zaka professionals who come and collect the bodies at the scene, and also by the people who were staffing the Forensic Institute in Israel initially. So we came in at the second week to basically bring in relief. Regardless, we were seeing a combination of blunt trauma, penetrating injury from shrapnel wounds, gunshot wounds, close range gunshot wounds, and signs of restraint, people being bound, as well as commingling of remains and people who were basically burned alive with signs of soot in their airway, indicating that they breathed in the smoke. And then also post-mortem burns as well. So there was, in addition to the ante-mortem injuries, the injuries that occurred before death, there were also post-mortem injuries to the bodies and to the remains. All of this is compatible with what was documented by the Hamas terrorists themselves online in their own incident videos that they broadcast to the internet. So our job as forensic pathologists is to objectively and scientifically document what we see, and that includes writing down notes about our findings, written reports, documenting the remains in other ways. So, for example, Dr. De La Garza, who unfortunately isn't on this call, but she was a professionally trained forensic photographer. So she took excellent photographic records. And then we also had radiology, specifically full body CT scans that would document the commingling of the bodies, the debris or the equipment that came in with them. So this was documented in multiple different ways, not just by the Zaka volunteers at the scene, but also by us in the morgue with photographs, written records, as well as radiology. And then ultimately, another level of evidence is going to come from the survivors themselves, the people who witnessed what happened. So we're just a piece of the puzzle. We're not the whole puzzle. We're just a piece of the puzzle, but our evidence is going to be part of putting together the picture of what actually happened on that day. Ariel, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so I would just add that so as Judy had mentioned, the initially the bodies were triaged sort at the military facility, and we were at the Greenberg Institute of Forensic Medicine. So the bodies were transported there after having been undergone some procedures like DNA sampling, photography, dental, fingerprints, and our task was to help identify the bodies that that couldn't be initially, immediately identified. Maybe need a little bit extra step. For instance, if somebody had a prominent tattoo, we would document that, or a scar, and hopefully that would correlate with something, information gleaned from the family member.
Oh, thank you. Dr. Wigren, you're not a dual citizen of Israel, and yet you and I talked about you had an interest in going, and you were supposed to go on a trip or what have you. Um, any kind of different perspective you bring as someone who is not necessarily a part of the Israel Jewish circle per se?
Yeah, just kind of a transformation on my part. I didn't think that an old guy like me at 62 could undergo kind of a paradigm shift. But I'm kind of a little left of center in my politics, and I vote for all the taxes that help the community, and so I had kind of a distaste for Israel, because of everything I had heard about Palestine. But it wasn't a focus of my reading of the paper. So it was just kind of this vague notion that Palestine good, Israel kind of bad, Israel militarized. And then actually visiting Tel Aviv and getting to know Israelis, um, it was really life-changing. And then, of course, what I saw in the morgue um, brought me to a realization that terrorism is a real thing. I mean, you would think I would have learned that lesson, in 2001 with 9/11, but it didn't register for some reason with me. But seeing this, personally witnessing the brutality inflicted by terrorists, Hamas, on civilian non-combatants was sobering. And then, additional reading I've done, like Noah Tishby's book. And now I've started Daniel Gordis's book about the history of Israel. And I actually find it so fascinating. And there are things that kind of resonate with kind of my leftist beliefs, which is, people from Russia actually moving to this new place, that would eventually become Israel in the 1910, 1920s to start kibbutzes like Degania. And I don't even know if I'm saying that right, but it's, yeah, and, and then I struggle too on another level with family members, neighbors. Some neighbors are very resistant to hearing anything about my experience in Israel because it doesn't resonate with what they're kind of being exposed to in American media. And then my own son, and you know, he he has trouble with Israel. So, trying to get around the family politics, it's been a bit of a struggle. I mean, it's and I don't mean to minimize people with post-traumatic stress disorder that have been in military combat, but there is this weird kind of odd thing that happens to a person who's seen things like this, like I saw in the morgue at Abu Kabir, that it's hard to talk to people about it. And you can only do it in very vague ways. And um, and then of course, I encounter resistance a lot of times. People don't want to hear anything about it. So that's been a bit of a struggle of mine. So.
I know that's been an issue. There was this 47-minute film that the IDF and the government had put together that they were showing to specifically to civic leaders um, and to the media. And as much as there was a sense of not wanting to compromise the dignity of those individuals, again, the need to kind of document this, knowing that it was going to be challenged. You are in a scientific profession where things are either are somewhat determinative in terms of a scientific method. Have you found that any of your colleagues globally have been kind of pushing back against this, even though they are scientists and the evidence is what the evidence is? Is the ideology so uh, insidious, the anti-Israel ideology so insidious that there are some folks even in your profession who are kind of pushing back against the things that you've seen, or is that really not an issue?
I
I haven't
personally
had,
can't speak to that,
yeah.
but yeah, maybe Judy can.
Yeah, I haven't had any experience with anybody questioning our findings within the forensic community. I think that there's a general understanding within the forensic community of what it is that we do, and that regardless of our own political ideologies or leanings or personal background, that when we're in the morgue, we're basically just focusing on what's in front of us and documenting the facts, and that what we document can be corroborated and verified objectively by physical evidence at the scene. That includes photography, radiography, and other witness testimony. So if there's a disconnect between it, it's because there is no disconnect. It's all compatible with what was on the video, in the verbal testimony, and in what we documented in the morgue in Tel Aviv. So there, there shouldn't be any disconnect. There won't be any disconnect. You're going to see the same things over and over again, and they're going to be compatible with one another, and they're going to be supportive. And we're all working independently of one another. So, what can come from that, unfortunately, is in the present political climate, people use that to espouse conspiracy theories. And the only way we can push back against conspiracists and conspiracy theories is with respectable procedures, protocols that are internationally recognized, and complete legalistic documentation of the physical evidence. And you can see that as it's come out, not just with Israeli Defense Forces and journalists, but also citizens making their own statements, going online and pushing back and saying the truth about what happened and what they witnessed themselves and what they saw. There are a lot of online campaigns to try to discredit the truth of what happened on October 7th. And we have to play our role as professionals to document it and then let the historians and the legal experts present that in court, whether that is an international court or whether that's being done through other means, through political means. That's our job. It's not our job to really have our own political leanings weigh into this, because they don't. We're just documenting the physical findings. And we all approach the job with utmost respect, dignity for the deceased, and also a meticulous attention to detail and protocol.
Doctors Goldsmith or Wigren, did you want to add to that at all? I mean, that was
Yeah, when you're in the morgue, and this occurs at every morgue, and it occurred in Tel Aviv, you kind of you get into a world that is, documenting, seeing things with your eyes, putting that to paper. And so I agree with Judy that, although I did say that I had kind of left of center political leanings, that all kind of disappears when you're in the morgue. It becomes science. Right. And, understanding how a person, died. So that's what I would add.
I would just add also, I would just add that we had 4 U.S. forensic pathologists joining the Israeli team, and then there was also a team of Swiss pathologists, and they were doing some work in the morgue, but also I think they got a tour of the military facility, and they were taking photographs as well. So that was part of their mission.
Yeah, so the Swiss were brought in as international monitors, basically. Swiss have a history of being unbiased in these kind of things, and they were brought in to document what they saw and be, an additional layer of transparency and unbiased documentation.
Thank you. One other question, this is one again that I think you probably have already affirmed, but one of the things, of the many egregious elements of this atrocity, was the utilization of sexual violence against women specifically. And that's something that has, I think, particularly been at issue when it comes to conspiracy theorists and deniers, particularly those who fight for the rights of women in every other venue, but would deny the experience of and the horrors of that occurred to Israeli women. If you could just, I would assume you can affirm that in your findings, that was clearly an evident tactic of this terrorist attack.
Well, we saw, I can recall we had a body where there was concentrated injury to the facial area, and I think that was a theme that some women had been sort of possibly more some type of assault to to their appearance, regarding their appearance. And as far as physical evidence of rape, we had arrived the second week, so we weren't able to take that kind of sampling, which would have to happen, almost immediately.
Yeah.
I do want to emphasize that the bodies that we saw were the most difficult to identify. So they were badly mutilated. They had severe burns. Some of them were post-mortem burns, or they were so badly decomposed because of the time that had passed until that they were found, that assessing for something like sexual assault would not be able to be done on the deceased that we saw. That said, there's quite a bit of photographic record and testimonial record by survivors that sexual assault occurred. And those are valid modalities of evidence collection as well. In terms of the bodies that we saw, the focus was primarily on identification. And I can confirm that there were decedents, the people who had died that we were identifying, were civilians. Some of them were in work clothes. Some of them were mothers with pacifiers with their bodies and, diaper bags and purses and jewelry. They were not military personnel. Okay, so this was an unprecedented attack on innocent civilians who were going by dressed for a music festival, dressed for shopping, having their, regular daytime, outfits with them. And they had shrapnel injuries. They had close range gunshot wounds, some of them shot in the back of the head, some of them burned and restrained. So we're dealing with terrorism here, regardless if there was direct physical evidence of sexual violence in the bodies that we saw. Sexual violence was very well documented by the testimonial evidence of the people who witnessed it at the scene and who survived the massacre from the music festival.
Dr. Wigren, did you want to add anything to that?
I don't think so. No.
Okay. You've been so generous with your time. I really appreciate it. Any final thoughts or things you want to kind of leave us with out of the extraordinary service that you have provided to not just the Jewish people in Israel, but to humanity? Any final thoughts?
But just in terms of evidence documentation, in addition to the terrorist victims, they were also included in the cases that we saw, actually the perpetrators themselves. And some of them actually had articles, with them. We would photograph them. But for instance, like electrical wire that, possibly could be used to bind someone's hands, or religious literature with a violent interpretation, or other art. We had an individual with athletic gear and a glove, and just things that could potentially document what kind of attacks were perpetrated.
Thank you. Any final thoughts, Drs. Wigren or Melinek?
For me, I think that one of the difficult tasks here is that there is not just the war itself in Israel in terms of the attacks on Israel and the role of the defensive forces in going into Gaza, but there's also an online war. And this kind of propaganda that's been put out to try to frame the conflict as one of colonial struggle or as some sort of human rights struggle on the part of the Palestinians completely ignores and tries to dismiss the role of what happened on October 7th to the citizens, innocent citizens, children, and foreign workers in Israel. There is an ongoing concerted effort online to rewrite the history of what happened on October 7th, deny that it happened, and lie about the role of Israelis in this conflict, making it as if they're the perpetrators rather than the victims. And so I think it's important for us, to speak out about what we saw, but also to continue to correct the record and document things as they come out. And I do see that the Israeli Defense Forces now, as they go into Gaza, they are bringing in with them international monitors and are documenting the things that they find. In the same way that we were documenting things in the morgue, the forces that are in Gaza are documenting the fact that they are finding weapons within hospitals, and rockets set up in schools. So this is an ongoing, pushback to the disinformation campaign to try to respond to the misinformation that's been spread online about this conflict. And it's going to go on. It's going to go on. It's going to take a while until the truth comes out. And we know that this is the case with the Holocaust itself, because during the Holocaust itself, people, and just so you know, like my family were Holocaust survivors. That's why they were in Israel, is because they escaped the Holocaust in Europe and made it to Palestine. During the Holocaust itself, people escaped the concentration camps and said what they were seeing and what was happening, and nobody believed them. And the Germans denied it. And even after the Holocaust, there were people who denied that it even happened. And there's still Holocaust deniers to this day who say that, oh, no, it didn't happen, or the numbers are exaggerated, or it's not exactly the way it is. And that's the reason why we have Holocaust museums, and we have historical agencies that document and keep all the paperwork. In the case of the Germans, they kept good paperwork themselves that were then captured. But you know what? So are the Hamas terrorists. Not only in the morgue in Abu Kabir that we collected evidence from the terrorist bodies, but also in Gaza now, they are collecting evidence of what the terrorists themselves have recorded, not just on their video cameras, but also on the CCTV at the hospitals and on the street itself. So the documentary evidence is going to be there. It's just going to take time to come out, and it will eventually be brought to the international courts, and the truth will come out. The truth will come out. So anything that's coming out right now that's online that seems contradictory, I want to give people hope that the truth will come out, and it's being collected as we speak.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, listen, thank you for your time. Thank you for your selflessness and service and sacrifice. Again, as I said, not just to Israel and to the Jewish people, but really to humanity, because documenting these crimes against humanity is really the key to hopefully reaching a time in which these kinds of things don't happen. So thank you so much for your time and your effort. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us.